Thank you very much. Can I start by starting where our first discussions were in COAG today. When COAG met this morning, we'd just been informed that Paul Lockyer, Gary Ticehurst and John Bean had lost their lives. So COAG took a moment to reflect on that. They are known to First Ministers, and we did want to express our condolences and our loving thoughts to those who would be grieving the loss of those people today. And certainly we want to take the opportunity to express our very sincere condolences to everyone in the ABC who would be feeling this very, very deeply. COAG met today and welcomed some new members, particularly new Premier of New South Wales and a new Chief Minister in the ACT. We took some time to farewell some old friends. Premier Mike Rann, this is his last COAG. We also took some time to farewell the Secretary of Prime Minister and Cabinet, Terry Moran, and this is his last COAG meeting as well. First Ministers today spent some time discussing the circumstances in the Australian economy, and we had discussions about the Australian economy and global economy last night. Out of those discussions, clearly First Ministers reflected on the volatility that we've seen in global markets. We also reflected on the fact that Australia has low unemployment, low debt and a pipeline of investment, that we are well placed to see through any global challenges. We had an expression of a discussion about the continuing confidence we have in the Australian economy. We also reflected on the fact that the growth in the Australian economy does pose challenges for many Australian firms, and consequently we have collectively resolved to continue on with economic reform to keep strengthening our economy for the future, even though our economy is well placed to meet the challenges of today. We have determined to press on with reforms in education, training and skills to help Australian firms to adjust to changes in the global economy and to take advantage of new opportunities. Specifically on the economic reform agenda, today COAG signed 3 agreements on heavy vehicles, rail and maritime safety. This is a major economic reform. Now, I understand that the question of heavy vehicle regulation doesn't necessarily sound all that interesting to some, but from the point of view of our economy, what the signing of these 3 agreements means is that the number of regulators in heavy vehicles, maritime safety and rail safety has been reduced from 23 to just 3. This means we are cutting a lot of wasteful red tape and delivering a $30 billion boost to the Australian economy for the next 20 years for heavy vehicles alone. And we are dealing with a very sizable section of the Australian economy. For railways, it means getting rid of 7 separate regulatory authorities, 46 pieces of state, territory and Commonwealth legislation, including 7 Rail Safety Acts, 9 OH&S Acts and 7 Dangerous Goods Acts. Heavy vehicle operators will not have to have 9 separate regulatory regimes to deal with their compliance work, and that's going to lead to increased efficiency and productivity for operators. It will mean that there is 1 maritime regulator and law replacing 50 pieces of maritime legislation and 7 state and territory regulators. So this is a very significant reform, meaning people will no longer bear a burden like a rail operator running services from Melbourne to Brisbane will no longer be required to have 3 different accreditations and pay 3 separate sets of fees to Victorian, New South Wales and Queensland regulators. It does mean things like those in shipping have national standards that they can construct vessels to. So this is an important reform. We will continue to press on with these kinds of reforms for a seamless national economy because it helps bolster productivity and economic growth. We've also committed ourselves to a major reform agenda in skills. Australia is undergoing a significant economic transformation. We've got the clean energy economy emerging, the resources boom, technological change, high-speed broadband, the increasing importance of services to our economy. In order to make sure that Australians can get the best of the opportunities that flow from this economic transformation, we do need to ensure that our vet system is as agile as possible, as responsive as possible, meeting the needs of businesses and industries. So First Ministers are committed to a vet reform agenda. A provision was made in the May budget for a vet reform agenda, and we are determined to get this done. However, we did note that good progress has been made to date through collaborative work by the Commonwealth with the states and territories. We have increased by 24% the number of people studying higher level courses of Certificate 3 and above, and we have increased by 40% those studying at diploma level. So this is good news that we already have more people studying higher qualifications, but more needs to be done. On the question of disability, First Ministers had a discussion arising from the Productivity Commission's work on a national disability insurance scheme. COAG has agreed on the need for major reform of disability services in Australia through a national disability insurance scheme, and I thank my colleagues for taking that decision today. We will, as First Ministers, as COAG, develop high-level principles by the end of the year to guide this reform process, including foundation reforms, funding and governance. We've also agreed to establish a select council of ministers from the Commonwealth, states and territories to start work laying the foundations for a national disability insurance scheme. So that's working on the kind of matters that Minister Macklin and others have been talking about, like common assessment tools which are necessary before you can contemplate wider reforms and deliver them. We've all acknowledged this is a very complex area of work. As the Productivity Commission told us, this will take a lot of time, a lot of thinking, a lot of careful preparation and a lot of collaboration between the jurisdictions, Commonwealth, states and territories, but we have resolved today that we do want to see this major reform. We also had an extensive discussion on mental health, but I may ask my colleague Premier Rand to speak to that because the discussion on mental health occurred at COAG as a result of his suggestion at the last meeting. This is, of course, the first time COAG has met since COAG delivered the landmark health reforms that will deliver more beds, more doctors, more nurses, more funding, with less waste and waiting time and less red tape. Today we took some steps to implement those reforms, some further steps, by agreeing that Ms Patricia Faulkner and Mr John Walsh should be the Chair and Deputy Chair of the National Health Performance Authority, and Mr Shane Solomon and Mr Jim Birch should be the Chair and Deputy Chair of the Industry Hospital Pricing Authority. COAG also had a discussion about carbon pricing and the government's package to price carbon. I think it won't amaze anybody in this room to say we didn't strike grand agreement on this question. So we've had an extensive discussion. I think the views of First Ministers are well known, but we did have the opportunity to discuss the federal government's carbon pricing package, which we are committed to and will deliver through the Parliament before the end of this year. In the absence of Chief Minister Paul Henderson, who is the Chair of the Council of the Australian Federation, he's already had to leave in order to travel back to the Northern Territory, we all thought it was appropriate to ask Premier Mike Rann to speak on behalf of the state colleagues, and then we'll be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Prime Minister. I think it's been a very strong work program today across a range of issues, and on mental health, this is an area where I think a number of us, and certainly I, felt that during the discussions over the past 5 or 6 years on national health reform and funding, that really the missing link was mental health. And we're obviously delighted that in the federal budget this year that there was a strong commitment from the Commonwealth to mental health, but clearly there's a lot more work to be done by all of us. We're in South Australia, currently undergoing a major reform of mental health. And I think that the message that we got from our invited experts today is that rather than a one-size-fits-all approach, that really more acute beds are not what is needed in mental health, but in fact intermediate care beds and community-based mental health care. Also a much stronger focus, if you look at the diagrams of the incidence of mental illness, a much stronger focus on young people, and also a very, very strong focus on mental health issues related to Aboriginal people as part of our closing the gap efforts. So I think that was a terrific discussion, and I think that discussion today is likely to shape future direction in terms of mental health reform across Australia. In other areas, we obviously did deal with the transport issues. It's incredibly important. It's the modern equivalent of dealing with the separate gauges, railway gauges between the states, in terms of signing off today on reforms that will benefit the national economy by billions of dollars. In other areas, of course, it's been mentioned about further reform in the areas of training. I think that's critically important in terms of what's happening to the changing nature of our economy, but also looking at the issue of international students. So we think that there's some real work to be done there. We've done incredibly well. In fact, in my state and a number of other states, international students are now about our third biggest export. And obviously, in order to correct some of the problems that had arisen in recent years, we've seen some pressures being placed on that, and obviously that's something that we want to address in the Knight Review coming up in coming months. In the area of the price on carbon, if I can just say this, in South Australia we have experienced record employment growth and strong infrastructure and economic growth in recent years. And it's interesting that if you look at the last 9 years, I think about 20 times the full-time jobs growth of the previous 8 or so years. But we've done that at a time that we've seen a drop in emissions. So it can be done. I mean, South Australia has about 7.2% of the population of Australia, but has 54% of the wind power, and we're also doing a lot of effort in the area of solar energy and geothermal. So we strongly support a price on carbon. It has to be done. It's about a transition to a new economy that means jobs, and we've demonstrated in South Australia that you can have strong jobs growth, strong commitment to the environment, and a strong commitment to reducing emissions and embracing renewable energy.
Thank you.